The fluorescent lights of the Springfield County Courthouse buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting a harsh glow on the worn linoleum floors. 3-year-old Emma Hayes sat perfectly still on a wooden bench that was far too big for her tiny frame, her legs dangling several inches above the ground. Her small hands were clasped tightly in her lap, fingers interlocked so firmly that her knuckles had turned white. She hadn't spoken a single word in 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, but who was counting? Everyone, it seemed. Every therapist, every social worker, every well-meaning adult who leaned down with concerned eyes and asked, "Emma, sweetie, can you tell me how you're feeling today?" The answer was always the same: silence. Mrs. Patricia Thompson sat beside Emma, her weathered hand gently resting on the child's small shoulder. At 67 years old, Patricia had fostered 19 children over the past 2 decades, but something about Emma had burrowed deep into her heart. The child was like a ghost, present but not really there, existing in some parallel universe where sound didn't escape her lips no matter how much pain lived behind her eyes. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," Patricia whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed her own words. Today was the day. The custody hearing that would determine whether Emma would return to her biological mother or remain in foster care indefinitely. Patricia had seen the way Emma's eyes lit up, just barely, when she saw photos of her mother. But she'd also witnessed the nightmares, the way Emma would wake up screaming without sound, her mouth open in a silent wail that was somehow more terrifying than any scream. The night that changed everything was etched into the court records, police reports, and Emma's fractured psyche. It had been a Tuesday evening 6 months ago. Emma's mother, Christine Hayes, had been dadding Derek Marshall for 8 months, 8 months too long as it turned out. Derek had a temper that simmered just below the surface, controlled by alcohol, and a childhood that had taught him violence was the answer to frustration. That night the argument had started over something trivial: burnt dinner, a misplaced wallet nobody could quite remember, but it had escalated rapidly. Emma had been playing with her dolls in the corner of their small apartment living room when Derek's voice had risen to a roar. Christine had tried to calm him, then defend herself, then finally shield Emma as Derek's fists began to fly. The neighbors called 911 when they heard furniture breaking and a woman's screams. When police arrived, they found Derek standing over Christine, who was crumpled on the floor with blood streaming from her nose and a rapidly swelling eye. Emma had been clutching her favorite doll, pressed into the corner, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had watched everything, absorbed everything. And then, as the officers handcuffed Derek and led him away, something inside that 3-year-old mind had simply shut down. The last words Emma had spoken were to her mother as the ambulance arrived: "Mommy, you're bleeding." Her voice had been small, confused, terrified. Since then, nothing. Not a word, not a sound beyond the occasional whimper in her sleep. Patricia watched Emma now, studying the child's profile. Emma's brown hair was pulled back in 2 neat pigtails, secured with butterfly clips that Patricia had carefully chosen that morning, hoping they might bring a smile. They hadn't. Emma wore a simple blue dress with white flowers, again, Patricia's choice, thinking that pretty clothes might lift the child's spirits. But Emma moved through the world like she was underwater, everything muffled and distant. The courthouse hallway was busy with morning traffic. Lawyers in expensive suits rushed past, clutching briefcases and smartphones. Other families waited on benches, their own dramas playing out in hushed, tense conversations. A baby cried somewhere down the hall, and Patricia felt Emma flinch at the sound, her small body tensing even further. Emma's case, courtroom 3, 9:30 a.m., the bailiff had told them when they checked in. It was now 9:15. 15 minutes until Emma's fate would be decided by strangers in black robes who would review files and reports and psychological evaluations that reduced a traumatized child's life to bullet points and clinical terminology. Patricia knew the arguments that would be presented. She'd been briefed by the social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, who had visited their home twice a week for the past 6 months. Christine Hayes had done everything right since that terrible night. She'd left Derek immediately, obtained a restraining order, attended every mandated counseling session, completed an intensive therapy program for domestic violence survivors, found stable employment at a local grocery store, and moved into a new apartment in a safer neighborhood. On paper, Christine was a success story, a woman who'd hit rock bottom and clawed her way back up for the sake of her daughter. But Emma's continued silence was the elephant in the room that nobody could ignore. The state's attorney would argue that the child's selective mutism, that's what the psychologists called it, indicated trauma so severe that returning her to her mother might cause further psychological damage. They would present Dr. Lisa Chen's evaluation, which noted that despite 6 months of play therapy, art therapy, and behavioral interventions, Emma had made minimal progress. The child communicated through nods, head shakes, and the occasional drawing, but her voice remained locked away. Patricia had her own opinions, though nobody had asked for them. She believed that Emma loved her mother fiercely. She'd seen the way Emma would trace Christine's face in photographs with one small finger, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The problem wasn't Christine. It was the memory of Derek, the fear that he might come back, that the violence might return like a monster from under the bed. A door opened down the hall and Emma's entire body went rigid. Patricia felt it through her hand, the way the child turned to stone, preparing for whatever came next. But it was just another case wrapping up, a family emerging from a different courtroom with relieved faces. "Not yet, honey," Patricia soothed. "We still have a few more minutes." Emma's eyes remained fixed on the polished floor, and Patricia found herself praying, something she didn't do often, that whoever walked through that door next might have the wisdom of Solomon and the compassion of a saint. Because this little girl deserved more than a system that reduced her pain to paperwork. She deserved a miracle. Neither of them knew that a miracle was exactly what was about to walk around the corner, in the form of a police officer, and a German shepherd named Rex. Officer Jake Morrison had been a cop for 12 years, but he'd been Rex's partner for only 8 months. 8 months that had changed his entire perspective on what it meant to serve and protect. As he guided his K-9 partner through the main entrance of Springfield County Courthouse that Tuesday morning, he couldn't help but smile at the way Rex's tail wagged gently, the dog's nose already working overtime to process the hundreds of scents that filled the building. "Easy boy," Jake murmured, his hand resting on the German shepherd's muscular shoulders. "Remember, we're on therapy duty today, not patrol." Rex looked up at him with those impossibly soulful brown eyes, and Jake could have sworn the dog understood every word. After 8 months together, he was convinced Rex was more human than some humans he knew. The Springfield Police Department's new courthouse canine comfort program had been Jake's idea, actually. After seeing how Rex interacted with his own niece, a shy 7-year-old who'd been terrified of dogs until she met Rex, Jake had pitched the concept to Chief Harrison. "Kids who have to testify in traumatic cases are already dealing with overwhelming stress," he'd argued. "What if we had specially trained therapy dogs available? Not just any dogs, police dogs. Dogs that represent safety and protection." Chief Harrison had been skeptical at first, but the research was compelling. Studies from courthouses in Seattle, Boston, and Miami showed that children who interacted with facility dogs before testifying displayed reduced anxiety, improved recall, and better overall emotional regulation. 3 months of bureaucratic red tape later, the program was approved. Jake and Rex became the pilot team. What made Rex perfect for this role, and what had almost kept him out of police work entirely, was his temperament. Rex had failed the police academy entrance exam twice, not because he wasn't smart or trainable, but because he was, in the words of Sergeant Davis, too damn gentle for his own good. The first time, Rex had been part of a drill where cadets practiced apprehension techniques. The dogs were supposed to attack a heavily padded suspect on command. Every other dog in the class had performed flawlessly, going for the padded arm with appropriate force. When it was Rex's turn, he'd run toward the suspect, then stopped 3 feet away and sat down, his tail wagging, waiting for the bad guy to pet him. The evaluators failed him immediately. 6 months later, Rex was given a second chance. Same drill, same result, except this time, Rex had actually licked the suspect's hand through the padding. "He's got no aggression," the head trainer had concluded. "He's a lover, not a fighter. Great family dog, but not police material." Jake had been there that day, observing the class because his previous K9 partner, Bruno, had just retired. While everyone else saw Rex's behavior as a failure, Jake saw something different. He saw a dog with extraordinary emotional intelligence, a dog who could distinguish between actual threats and simulated ones, a dog who led with trust instead of fear. "Give him to me," Jake had said. "I'll work with him." It took 3 months of intensive, specialized training. Instead of teaching Rex to be more aggressive, Jake leaned into the dog's natural gentleness while building his protective instincts around specific scenarios. They focused on detection work, narcotics, explosives, search and rescue, situations where Rex's nose and intelligence mattered more than his bite. And slowly, something remarkable emerged. Rex learned to protect not through violence, but through presence. He could place himself between Jake and danger, could alert to threats without attacking, could de-escalate tense situations simply by being there. The breakthrough came during a domestic disturbance call. Jake and Rex had responded to a home where a father was threatening his family. When they arrived, the man's 8-year-old daughter was hiding behind the couch, crying. While Jake dealt with the father, Rex had done something extraordinary. He'd gone to the little girl, lowered himself to the ground, and rested his head on her lap. The child's crying had stopped almost immediately. When officers escorted the father out, the girl was still holding onto Rex, and she was able to give a clear statement to the responding social worker, something she'd been too hysterical to do before Rex's intervention. That's when Jake knew Rex's real calling wasn't chasing criminals. It was healing broken spirits. Now, as they walked through the courthouse's west wing toward the family court section, Rex was in full therapy mode. His gait was relaxed, his ears forward but not alert, his entire demeanor broadcasting calm and safety. They passed a young woman crying on a bench, and Rex paused, looking at Jake for permission. Jake nodded, and Rex approached slowly, sitting beside the woman's feet. She looked down, startled, then broke into a tearful smile as she reached out to touch his head. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's a good listener, too," Jake replied with a warm smile. "Take all the time you need." They stayed for 3 minutes. Jake had learned that sometimes 3 minutes of quiet comfort from a dog could do more than an hour of human counseling. When the woman's name was called, she stood with straighter shoulders and thanked them both. As they continued down the hallway, Rex suddenly did something unusual. His easy pace faltered. His nose lifted, catching a scent or perhaps something more, a frequency of distress that only dogs could perceive. His ears swiveled forward, focusing on something around the corner ahead of them. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, noticing the subtle shift in his partner's body language. Rex wasn't alerting to danger. This was different. This was the same focused attention he'd shown with Jake's niece, with the little girl at the domestic call, with every traumatized child they'd encountered, but more intense somehow, more urgent. Rex pulled forward gently but insistently on the leash, his tail beginning a slow, purposeful wag. Whatever, or whoever, was around that corner, Rex had already decided they needed him. And in 8 months of partnership, Jake had learned to trust Rex's instincts more than his own. "All right, buddy," Jake said softly, letting Rex lead the way. "Let's go see who needs us." As they rounded the corner into the family court waiting area, Rex's entire body language shifted into something Jake had never quite seen before. The dog's focus zeroed in on a small bench across the hall, where an elderly woman sat next to a tiny figure in a blue dress with butterfly clips in her hair. The little girl sat unnaturally still, her eyes fixed on the floor, radiating a kind of silent pain that made Jake's chest tighten. Rex made the decision before Jake could even process what was happening. The dog pulled forward with gentle determination, every fiber of his being drawn to the silent child like a compass finding true north. And somehow, Jake knew, they just found the reason they were really here today. This wasn't a routine therapy visit anymore. This was destiny. Patricia Thompson felt the change in the air before she understood what was causing it. After 43 years of teaching elementary school and nearly 2 decades of fostering children, she developed an almost supernatural ability to sense shifts in a room's emotional temperature. Something was different. Something was approaching. She looked up from her quiet vigil beside Emma and saw them. A police officer in a crisp uniform and the most magnificent German shepherd she'd ever laid eyes on. But it wasn't the dog's size or bearing that caught her attention. It was the way the animal was staring directly at Emma with an intensity that bordered on supernatural. The dog had stopped moving entirely, every muscle in his body focused on the small, silent child beside her. "Ma'am," the officer said softly, approaching with careful, measured steps. His voice was gentle, the kind of voice that understood trauma without needing an explanation. "I'm Officer Morrison and this is Rex. We're part of the courthouse therapy program for children." He paused, watching Emma's absolute stillness. "Would your little one like to meet him?" Patricia felt Emma's shoulder tense beneath her hand, not with fear, but with something else. Awareness, perhaps. For the first time in the 45 minutes they'd been sitting on that bench, Emma's absolute stillness had been broken by the tiniest shift in her posture. "Her name is Emma," Patricia said quietly. She's been through a lot, she doesn't speak." The words felt inadequate, like trying to describe an ocean by calling it wet. Patricia glanced down at Emma, whose eyes remained fixed on the floor. "Sweetie, there's a very nice dog here. Would you like to say hello?" Emma didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She didn't move at all. But something in the air changed again, and Rex felt it. What happened next would be something Officer Jake Morrison would describe in reports, recount to his fellow officers, and eventually tell his own children years later. Rex, a 70-pound German shepherd trained in protocol and precision, did something that defied every rule in his training manual. The dog slowly, deliberately lowered himself to the ground, not into a standard sit or down position, but onto his belly, his powerful body flattening against the cold courthouse floor. Then, inch by careful inch, he began to crawl forward. His front legs pulled him along the linoleum, his hindquarters following, his entire massive frame making itself as small and unthreatening as physically possible. Jake stood frozen, his hand still holding the leash but no longer controlling it. Rex had never done this before, not in training, not in the field, not even with Jake's terrified niece. This was pure instinct, some ancient canine wisdom that understood exactly what this broken child needed. The distance between Rex and Emma was perhaps 10 feet, but the dog covered it like he was approaching a wounded bird, slow, patient, broadcasting safety with every movement. His ears were soft, not pinned back in fear but relaxed in friendship. His tail swept gently back and forth across the floor, a slow metronome of reassurance. His eyes, those impossibly expressive brown eyes, never left Emma's downturned face. 7 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet. Patricia felt her throat tighten with emotion. Other people in the hallway had stopped to watch this unusual scene. A lawyer clutching a briefcase paused mid-stride. A courthouse clerk abandoned her coffee run. Even the hardened bailiff standing by courtroom 3 found himself unable to look away. 4 feet, 3 feet. Rex stopped crawling when he was about 2 feet from Emma's dangling feet, close enough to be present, far enough to not overwhelm. And then he did something that made Patricia's eyes fill with tears. He rested his chin on the floor and released a deep, contented sigh, the kind of sigh that says, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and you're safe." For a long moment, nothing happened. The hallway held its collective breath. Emma remained still as a statue, her small hand still clasped in her lap, her eyes still studying the floor as if it held the secrets of the universe. Then slowly, so slowly that Patricia almost missed it, Emma's right hand began to move. Her fingers unclenched from her left hand, a small act of bravery that felt monumental. The hand lifted from her lap, trembling like a leaf in a storm, hovering in the space between her body and the patient dog waiting below. Patricia wanted to say something encouraging, but instinctively knew that words would shatter this fragile moment. Jake Morrison felt the same way, standing motionless, barely breathing, watching a miracle unfold in slow motion. Emma's hand continued its journey, floating through the air with agonizing slowness. Her fingers were pale and thin, the nails bitten down to the quick, evidence of the anxiety that lived inside her silent world. The hand moved closer to Rex's head, which remained perfectly still on the floor, his eyes now half closed in a gesture of complete non-threat. 6 inches from Rex's fur, 5 inches, 4 inches. Emma's hand paused, trembling violently now, as if the final distance was an impossible chasm to cross. This was trust, Patricia realized. This tiny gesture represented a leap of faith that Emma hadn't been able to make with any human being in 6 months, not with therapists who had fancy degrees and kind smiles, not with Patricia herself, despite months of gentle care. But somehow, with this dog, this silent child was finding the courage to reach out. 3 inches, 2 inches. And then contact. Emma's fingertips touched the soft fur between Rex's ears, and the entire world seemed to shift on its axis. The touch was feather-light at first, barely making contact, testing whether this was real or another source of pain. Rex's response was perfect. He did absolutely nothing. He didn't move, didn't look up, didn't react at all except for the continued gentle sweep of his tail against the floor. Encouraged by his stillness, Emma's touch became firmer. Her palm flattened against Rex's head, her small fingers spreading into his thick coat. And then her other hand joined the first, both of Emma's hands now buried in Rex's fur. Something profound happened in that moment. Patricia watched, transfixed, as Emma's rigid posture began to soften. The child's shoulders, which had been hunched up near her ears in permanent tension, began to lower. Her breathing, which had been shallow and controlled, deepened. And most remarkably, her eyes, those haunted, downcast eyes, slowly lifted from the floor. Emma looked at Rex, really looked at him. And Rex, sensing the shift, slowly raised his head from the floor, keeping his movements glacier-slow and deliberate. His nose was now level with Emma's knees, and he maintained that position, letting the child control the interaction completely. For the first time in 6 months, Emma Hayes's face showed something other than blank disconnection or silent fear. The tiniest hint of something else flickered across her features, not quite a smile, not yet, but the ghost of what a smile might become, the promise that joy might someday return. Jake Morrison felt his eyes burning. He'd seen Rex work magic before, but this was different. This was watching a soul begin to heal in real time. He glanced at his watch, 9:27. Emma's hearing was scheduled for 9:30, 3 minutes. "Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, having to break the moment, "I think Emma's case is about to be called." Patricia nodded, reality crashing back. She gently touched Emma's shoulder. "Sweetheart, we need to go into the courtroom soon." Emma's response was immediate and visceral. Her hands tightened in Rex's fur, her fingers gripping with sudden fierce intensity. Her body went rigid again, and her eyes, which had just begun to show life, flooded with panic. She pulled Rex closer, wrapping her small arms around his thick neck, holding on like he was a life preserver in a stormy sea. "No," Patricia whispered, understanding. "Oh, honey, I know." Jake Morrison made a decision that would change protocol, bend regulations, and ultimately alter the course of a child's life. He knelt down beside Emma and Rex, bringing himself to her eye level. "Emma," he said gently, "what if Rex came with you? Would that help?" For the first time, Emma's eyes met a human's directly. She looked at Jake Morrison with such desperate hope that it nearly broke his heart. And though she didn't speak, her voice still locked away. Her answer was written clearly across her face. "Please, yes, don't make me let go." "Then Rex is going in with you," Jake said firmly, standing and looking at Patricia. "I'll talk to the judge. This dog isn't leaving this little girl's side." The bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. "Emma Hayes' case. Judge Sullivan is ready." Patricia stood, helping Emma to her feet. The child's hands never released their grip on Rex's fur. The dog stood smoothly, positioning himself beside Emma like a furry guardian angel, matching his pace to her tiny steps. As they walked toward courtroom 3, woman, child, and dog, everyone who watched knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. They just didn't know yet exactly how extraordinary it was about to become. Behind the heavy oak doors, Judge Margaret Sullivan was reviewing Emma's file one final time, unaware that the most important testimony of her career was about to be delivered not by lawyers or experts, but by a 3-year-old girl and the dog who just taught her that trust was still possible. Judge Margaret Sullivan had presided over family court for 23 years, and in that time, she'd developed what her clerk called an iron constitution. She'd heard testimony that would make seasoned prosecutors weep. She'd seen evidence of human cruelty that haunted her dreams. She'd made decisions that sent children back to troubled homes and decisions that tore families apart. Each case left a mark on her soul, but she'd learned to maintain the professional distance necessary to render fair judgments. Emma Hayes' case, however, had gotten under her skin. Judge Sullivan was 58 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and reading glasses that perpetually perched on the end of her nose. She had 3 grown children of her own and 5 grandchildren, and perhaps that's why Emma's file had kept her awake for the past 3 nights. The facts were straightforward enough. Domestic violence, child witness to trauma, mother's rehabilitation, state's concerns about the child's continued mutism. But behind those clinical facts was a 3-year-old who'd been so thoroughly broken that she'd forgotten how to speak. She looked up from her desk as the courtroom began to fill. Emma's mother, Christine Hayes, entered first with her attorney, Daniel Price, a public defender with kind eyes and worn shoes. Christine was 28 but looked older, her face bearing the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting your way back from rock bottom. She wore a simple navy dress and clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. When she took her seat at the defendant's table, her eyes immediately went to the courtroom doors, waiting for her daughter. Across the aisle, Assistant State's Attorney Jennifer Walsh arranged her files with practiced efficiency. Walsh was in her early 40s, professionally dressed in a charcoal suit, and known for her thorough preparation. This wasn't personal for her. It never was. Her job was to represent the state's interest in child welfare, and she did it well. Today, she would argue that Emma's continued trauma meant Christine Hayes wasn't ready to resume custody. Behind the tables, the gallery held a handful of observers: a court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Lisa Chen, a social worker from Child Protective Services, and 2 law students who were shadowing family court proceedings. Everyone waited in that peculiar silence that fills courtrooms before difficult cases begin. Judge Sullivan straightened her robes and glanced at her clerk. "Is the child here?" "Yes, Your Honor," the clerk responded. "The bailiff is bringing her in now." What happened next would become courthouse legend. The heavy oak doors swung open and Bailiff Marcus Johnson stepped inside. But instead of his usual formal announcement, Marcus paused, his weathered face showing clear confusion. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "the child is here, but there's a situation." Before Judge Sullivan could respond, the rest of the unusual procession entered. Patricia Thompson came first, her hand resting protectively on Emma's small shoulder. Emma herself was barely visible behind the massive German shepherd walking directly beside her, the child's hands buried deeply in the dog's fur. Officer Jake Morrison brought up the rear, his expression a mixture of determination and apology. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Christine Hayes half rose from her chair, her hand flying to her mouth. Jennifer Walsh's eyes widened. Even the court reporter stopped typing momentarily, staring at the unprecedented sight. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Sullivan's voice cut through the murmurs, not angry but certainly surprised. In 23 years, she'd never had a dog enter her courtroom, let alone a police K-9. Officer Morrison stepped forward quickly. "Your Honor, I apologize for the irregular circumstances. I'm Officer Jake Morrison with the Springfield Police Department's Courthouse K-9 Comfort Program. This is Rex, my K-9 partner. We encountered Emma in the hallway and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The child has formed an immediate attachment. She's experiencing significant distress at the prospect of separating from the dog." Judge Sullivan removed her glasses and studied the scene before her. Emma Hayes, the silent ghost child from the reports, was clinging to this dog like it was the only solid thing in a liquid world. The child's face was pressed against Rex's neck, and even from the bench, Judge Sullivan could see the white-knuckled grip of those small hands. "Counselors approach," she said crisply. Daniel Price and Jennifer Walsh moved to the bench. Judge Sullivan leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Ms. Walsh, Mr. Price, I'm inclined to allow this. I've read the research on facility dogs in courtrooms with traumatized children. What are your positions?" Jennifer Walsh frowned. "Your Honor, while I understand the therapeutic intent, this is highly irregular. We have no way of knowing if the dog's presence will influence." "Ms. Walsh," Judge Sullivan interrupted, her tone sharp, "that child hasn't spoken in 6 months. If a dog can help her feel safe enough to communicate, I'm not going to be the judge who denied that opportunity. Mr. Price." Daniel Price glanced back at Christine, who was openly crying now, watching her daughter with an expression of mingled hope and heartbreak. "The defense has no objection, Your Honor. We welcome anything that helps Emma feel comfortable." "Very well." Judge Sullivan raised her voice to address the full courtroom. "Officer Morrison, your K-9 partner may remain. However, this is still a court of law and I expect appropriate decorum. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor, thank you." Jake's relief was palpable. "Mrs. Thompson, please bring Emma forward." Patricia gently guided Emma toward the witness area, a small section to the left of the judge's bench with a chair that had been specially modified to be child-friendly. But as they approached, Emma's grip on Rex intensified. The dog, sensing her distress, pressed closer against her legs, his body language screaming protection and comfort. "She won't sit without him, Your Honor," Patricia said softly. Judge Sullivan sighed, but there was warmth in it. "Then bring the dog up as well. Let's make this work." The arrangement that followed was unconventional. Emma sat in the chair, but Rex positioned himself directly beside her, his large body pressed against the chair so Emma could maintain contact. Officer Morrison stood at a respectful distance, ready to intervene if needed but giving Emma space. Christine Hayes watched from her table, tears streaming down her face. This was the first time she'd seen her daughter in person in 2 weeks. Supervised visits had been reduced pending the hearing. "Baby," she whispered, though Emma couldn't hear her from across the room. Judge Sullivan cleared her throat. "Let the record show that we are convening in the matter of Emma Hayes, case number JV20241847. We're here to determine custody arrangements following the completion of Christine Hayes's court-mandated rehabilitation program." She looked at Emma, her expression softening despite her professional demeanor. "Hello, Emma. My name is Judge Sullivan. I know this might be scary, but everyone here wants to help you. Do you understand?" Emma didn't respond. She kept her face turned toward Rex, her small fingers rhythmically stroking his fur as if each stroke was a prayer. "Let the record also show that the child is nonverbal at this time," Judge Sullivan said. "Ms. Walsh, you may present the state's case." Jennifer Walsh stood, her voice taking on the measured tone of professional advocacy. "Thank you, Your Honor. The state acknowledges that Christine Hayes has completed every requirement of her rehabilitation program. She has maintained sobriety, secured employment, obtained stable housing, and demonstrated commitment to addressing the issues that led to her child's removal. However," the however hung in the air like an axe waiting to fall. "However," Walsh continued, "Emma Hayes has not spoken a single word since the night of the domestic violence incident 6 months ago. Despite extensive therapy, play therapy, art therapy, behavioral intervention, the child remains selectively mute. Dr. Chen's psychological evaluation, which I'll enter as Exhibit A, indicates that Emma's trauma response is severe and ongoing. The state's position is that, while Ms. Hayes has made commendable personal progress, the evidence suggests Emma may need a level of specialized care and stability that the mother cannot yet provide." Christine's attorney began to rise in objection, but Judge Sullivan held up her hand. "You'll have your turn, Mr. Price. Continue, Ms. Walsh." "The state recommends continued foster placement with the Thompson family, with expanded supervised visitation for Ms. Hayes, to be reassessed in 6 months. This would allow time to evaluate whether Emma's condition improves and whether Ms. Hayes can maintain her current trajectory." Judge Sullivan nodded, making notes. "Thank you, Mr. Price, the defense's position." Daniel Price stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, my client has done everything, and I mean everything asked of her. She has completed a year-long intensive therapy program. She left her abuser the night of the incident and has maintained a restraining order. She has secured employment and housing. She attends parenting classes and individual counseling weekly. The question before this court isn't whether Christine Hayes is trying, she is. The question is whether the state can indefinitely separate a mother from her child, based on the child's understandable trauma response to witnessing violence that the mother herself was a victim of." "That's a compelling argument, Counselor," Judge Sullivan said. "But how do you address Emma's continued mutism?" "With respect, Your Honor, perhaps the problem isn't whether Ms. Hayes is capable of parenting. Perhaps the problem is that Emma needs her mother, and the continued separation is preventing healing rather than facilitating it." The courtroom fell silent. It was a powerful point. Judge Sullivan looked at Emma, still clinging to Rex, and felt the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. "I'd like to hear from Dr. Chen," she said. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, would reunification pose a risk to Emma's psychological well-being?" Dr. Lisa Chen stood, adjusting her glasses. She was a small woman in her 50s with an air of academic authority. "Your Honor, this is an exceptionally difficult case. Emma's selective mutism is a trauma response, specifically to witnessing intimate partner violence. The research suggests that her fear may be centered on the abuser rather than her mother. However, without Emma being able to verbalize her feelings, we cannot know for certain what would feel safe for her." "Can you ask her?" Judge Sullivan said suddenly. "Can someone ask this child what she wants?" Everyone looked at Emma. The little girl was a statue again, her entire world narrowed to the feeling of Rex's fur beneath her fingers. Judge Sullivan made a decision. She stood from the bench and walked down, something judges rarely did, moving slowly toward Emma. The little girl's eyes widened, but she didn't let go of Rex. "Emma," Judge Sullivan said gently, kneeling to be at eye level, "I know you're scared. I know words feel hard right now. But sweetheart, I need to understand what you need. What would make you feel safe?" The courtroom held its breath. 47 people waited for an answer they knew wouldn't come. And then Emma did something extraordinary. She leaned close to Rex's ear, so close her lips nearly touched his fur, and she whispered. The whisper was so quiet that for a moment everyone thought they'd imagined it. The courtroom had fallen into such complete silence that even the ancient heating system's hum seemed to fade into nothingness. 47 people leaned forward collectively, as if physical proximity might help them hear what Emma Hayes was saying to a dog. Officer Jake Morrison stood closest to Emma, perhaps 3 feet away, his body positioned at an angle that gave him a direct line to where Emma's mouth pressed against Rex's ear. He'd been watching Rex's reactions, the subtle twitch of the dog's ear, the slight turn of his head, the way his tail had stilled mid-wag as if he, too, was concentrating on something important. Then Jake's entire expression transformed. His eyes widened. His mouth opened slightly. His hand, which had been resting casually on his duty belt, moved to cover his heart as if he'd just received a physical blow. The color drained from his face, then rushed back in a wave of emotion that he clearly struggled to control. Judge Sullivan saw it immediately. 23 years on the bench had taught her to read body language like some people read books. "Officer Morrison," she said, her voice sharp with urgency, "did the child just speak?" Jake Morrison looked at Judge Sullivan, then at Emma, then back at the judge. He appeared to be wrestling with something, protocol, perhaps, or the sheer magnitude of what he'd just witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion that he didn't try to hide. "Yes, Your Honor, Emma just spoke." He paused, swallowing hard. She whispered to Rex. The courtroom erupted. Christine Hayes let out a sound halfway between a sob and a gasp, rising from her chair before her attorney pulled her gently back down. Jennifer Walsh's professional composure cracked, her hand flying to her mouth. Patricia Thompson openly wept. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over the keys, forgetting her job in the face of the miracle unfolding before her. "Order!" Judge Sullivan's gavel came down once firmly. "Order in this court." She turned her full attention to Jake Morrison. "Officer, what did Emma say?" Jake looked down at Emma, who had pulled back from Rex and was now watching the officer with eyes that held both fear and desperate hope. He knelt down, bringing himself to her level, and his voice gentled in a way that spoke of his own children, his own understanding of how fragile this moment was. "Emma," he said softly, "is it okay if I tell the judge what you told Rex?" Emma's response was barely perceptible, the tiniest nod of her head, so small that if you'd blinked you would have missed it. But it was there. Permission granted. Jake stood, squaring his shoulders as if preparing to deliver testimony in a murder trial. In a way, he was testifying to the murder of a little girl's sense of safety and the possibility of its resurrection. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "Emma told Rex, 'Tell them I miss my mommy, but I'm scared of the bad man.'" The courtroom exploded again. This time, Judge Sullivan didn't even reach for her gavel. She understood that some moments were too big to contain, too powerful to silence. Christine Hayes collapsed forward onto the table, her shoulders shaking with sobs so violent that her entire body trembled. Her attorney, Daniel Price, abandoned all professional distance and put a comforting hand on her back while wiping his own eyes. Jennifer Walsh sat down heavily in her chair, her carefully prepared arguments suddenly irrelevant. Dr. Lisa Chen was scribbling notes frantically, her academic mind trying to process the clinical significance of what had just occurred while her human heart simply rejoiced. Judge Sullivan felt her own eyes burning. In 23 years, she'd trained herself not to cry in court. That training failed her now. She removed her glasses and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, not caring who saw. "Emma," she said, her voice rough with emotion, "the bad man, do you mean Derek? The man who hurt your mommy?" Emma didn't nod this time. Instead, she did something even more remarkable. She looked directly at Judge Sullivan, the first time she'd made direct eye contact with anyone except Rex and Officer Morrison, and her small voice emerged, fragile as spun glass but unmistakably present. "He was mean to Mommy." 3 words. 3 words that carried 6 months of locked-away terror. He hurt her. Christine's wail of anguish echoed through the courtroom. "Baby, I'm so sorry. Mommy's so sorry." Emma's head whipped toward her mother's voice. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Emma seemed to truly see Christine. Tears began streaming down the child's face, but she didn't make a sound. as if crying had its own voice and speaking had used up all the voice she had. Judge Sullivan made a decision that bent every protocol in her courtroom. "Ms. Hayes, you may approach your daughter." Daniel Price looked shocked. "Your Honor, is that?" "I said she may approach," Judge Sullivan repeated, her tone brooking no argument. Christine Hayes stood on shaking legs and walked toward Emma. Each step seemed to take a lifetime. Emma watched her mother come closer, and everyone in that courtroom held their breath, wondering if the child would retreat, would shut down again, would return to her fortress of silence. When Christine was 3 feet away, she stopped, not wanting to overwhelm Emma. She knelt on the courtroom floor, not caring that her dress would wrinkle or that this would be recounted in the legal community for years to come. All she cared about was the little girl who was her entire world. "Emma, baby," Christine whispered, "he's gone. The bad man is gone. He's in jail and he can never ever hurt us again. I promise. Mommy promises." Emma looked at her mother, then at Rex, then back at her mother. The internal debate playing across her 3-year-old face was heartbreaking. The war between what she wanted and what she feared, between love and terror, between hope and the lessons that trauma had taught her. "Is he really gone?" Emma's voice was barely audible, but in the silent courtroom everyone heard it clearly. "Yes, baby, really, truly gone. There are police officers like Officer Morrison who make sure he stays away. And there are judges like Judge Sullivan who made rules that keep us safe. He can't come back." Emma processed this information with the seriousness of someone far older than 3. Then she asked a question that broke every heart in the room and somehow healed them at the same time. "Can Rex come home with us?" The question hung in the air, innocent and profound. Emma wasn't asking if she could go home. She was asking if Rex, her newfound safety, her bridge back to the world of the speaking, could be part of whatever home looked like. Judge Sullivan looked at Officer Morrison, who looked at Rex, who looked at Emma with those impossibly wise brown eyes. And Jake Morrison, a 12-year police veteran who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, made another decision that would change his life. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion roiling through him, "Rex and I would be honored to make home visits if the court and Ms. Hayes would permit it. Not as supervision exactly, but as support." Judge Sullivan sat back in her chair, struck by the beautiful simplicity of it. A dog had succeeded where therapists, social workers, and the entire family court system had failed. Rex had given Emma her voice back. Who was she to argue with that kind of miracle? "Ms. Walsh," Judge Sullivan said, "I'd like to hear the state's revised position." Jennifer Walsh stood slowly. She'd come prepared to argue for continued separation. She'd had statistics, psychological evaluations, case precedents. All of that felt absurd now in the face of a 3-year-old who just told them exactly what she needed. "Your Honor," Walsh said, and there was no defeat in her voice, just honesty. "The state's concern has always been Emma's well-being. What we've witnessed today suggests that Emma's trauma is specific to her mother's former partner, not to her mother herself. Given Emma's expressed desire to be with her mother and her remarkable breakthrough in this dog's presence." She paused, then continued firmly, "The state withdraws its objection to reunification." The courtroom erupted in applause, wildly inappropriate for a court proceeding, but Judge Sullivan let it happen. Some moments transcended protocol. Christine Hayes's knees nearly buckled. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." But Judge Sullivan wasn't finished. She knew that happy endings required structure, support, and accountability. The hard work of healing was just beginning. "However," the judge said, her voice rising above the celebration, "we will not be doing this without safeguards. Here is my ruling." Every person in that courtroom turned their full attention to the woman in black robes who held Emma's future in her hands. Judge Sullivan looked at Emma, at Christine, at Officer Morrison and Rex, at Patricia Thompson, and at all the people who'd played a role in bringing this moment to pass. And then she began to outline a plan that would give a broken family a second chance, with 4 paws and a wagging tail leading the way. Judge Margaret Sullivan had written thousands of court orders in her 23-year career. She'd crafted custody arrangements, visitation schedules, and protection orders with the careful precision of someone who understood that words on paper translated into lived realities for vulnerable children. But the order she was about to dictate would be unlike anything she'd ever composed before. She looked at Emma, who was now sitting with one arm around Rex's neck, the dog's presence having transformed the terrified, silent child into someone who could finally express her truth. This was what justice was supposed to look like, not just laws and precedents, but wisdom applied to the specific, unique circumstances of a human life. "Here is the court's ruling," Judge Sullivan began, her voice carrying the weight of authority tempered by compassion. "Christine Hayes, you will regain full custody of your daughter Emma Hayes, effective immediately." Christine's sob of relief echoed through the courtroom, but Judge Sullivan held up her hand. "However, this reunification comes with specific, non-negotiable conditions. Failure to comply with any of these conditions will result in immediate review and possible reversal of this order. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Christine managed through her tears. "Anything, I'll do anything." Judge Sullivan nodded. "First, you will continue with your individual therapy sessions weekly for a minimum of 1 year. Your therapist will provide monthly reports to this court. Second, Emma will begin trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy with Dr. Chen starting within 1 week of today. Christine, you will participate in family therapy sessions with Emma bi-weekly." Dr. Chen was already nodding, making notes on her tablet. "Third," the judge continued, "the restraining order against Derek Marshall is hereby extended indefinitely. He is to have 0 contact with you or Emma. No calls, no letters, no third-party communication. If he violates this order by even 1 inch, he will face immediate criminal charges and extended jail time. Officer Morrison, I'm ordering that the police department be notified of this extension and that extra patrol attention be given to Ms. Hayes' residence for the next 6 months." Jake Morrison straightened. "Absolutely, Your Honor. I'll personally ensure the order is distributed to all shifts." Fourth, Child Protective Services will conduct unannounced home visits twice monthly for the first 3 months, then monthly thereafter for the remainder of the year. Ms. Walsh, I trust your office will coordinate this. Jennifer Walsh nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, we'll have a caseworker assigned by end of business today." Judge Sullivan paused, then delivered the condition that would make this case legendary in Springfield legal circles. "Fifth, and this is perhaps the most unusual order I've ever issued," she said, a slight smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "Officer Jake Morrison and his K-9 partner Rex will make weekly home visits to the Hayes residence for a minimum of 6 months. These visits are not supervision in the traditional sense, they are therapeutic support. Officer Morrison, I understand this falls outside your normal duties. Are you willing to undertake this on a voluntary basis?" Every eye in the courtroom turned to Jake Morrison. This was asking a lot, weekly visits on his own time, an open-ended commitment to a family he'd met less than an hour ago, blurring the lines between his professional duties and personal investment. Jake didn't hesitate. He looked at Emma, who was watching him with those huge brown eyes, and then at Rex, whose tail was wagging slowly as if the dog already knew the answer. "Your Honor," Jake said firmly, "Rex and I would be honored. We'll be there every week. You have my word." Emma's face transformed. It wasn't quite a smile, she wasn't ready for that yet, but something close to it. Something that suggested that maybe someday joy might return to her world. Christine was openly weeping now, but these were different tears than the ones she'd cried earlier. These were tears of gratitude, of hope, of the overwhelming relief that comes when you've been drowning and someone finally throws you a lifeline. Your Honor, Christine said, her voice breaking, I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to thank any of you. Judge Sullivan's expression softened further. Ms. Hayes, the way you thank us is by being the mother Emma needs. By staying strong, staying clean, and creating the safe, stable home that child deserves. That's the only thanks required. I will, Christine promised. I swear I will. There's one more thing, Judge Sullivan said, and her tone shifted slightly, warmer, less formal. Emma, sweetheart, can you look at me? Emma's gaze lifted to meet the judge's eyes. The connection held. Emma, you are one of the bravest people I have ever met, Judge Sullivan said, and she meant every word. What you did today, finding your voice, telling us what you needed, that took more courage than most adults ever have to show. I want you to know that all these grown-ups in this room, we're all here to keep you safe. Your mommy, Officer Morrison, Rex, Mrs. Thompson, Dr. Chen, me, we're all on your team. Do you understand? Emma nodded slowly. Then, in a voice that was gaining strength with each use, she said, Thank you, Judge. If the earlier moments had broken hearts, this one shattered them completely and then rebuilt them stronger. A 3-year-old thanking a judge with perfect, genuine politeness. It was a glimpse of who Emma had been before trauma had stolen her voice, and who she could become again with support. Judge Sullivan had to pause to compose herself. You're very welcome, Emma, very welcome indeed. She looked around the courtroom at all the people who had played a part in this remarkable morning. Before we conclude, I want to say something off the record. She nodded to the court reporter, who lifted her hands from the keys. What happened here today is what our justice system is supposed to do, not just enforce laws, but serve the actual needs of actual people. A little girl needed to feel safe enough to find her voice. A dog gave her that safety. Sometimes the best therapy doesn't come from a textbook or a courtroom procedure. Sometimes it comes from an unlikely friendship and people willing to think outside the box. She looked directly at Officer Morrison. Officer, what made you bring Rex to this hallway this morning? Jake thought about it. Honestly, Your Honor, Rex brought me. He sensed something, someone who needed him. I've learned to trust his instincts. Then we all owe Rex a debt of gratitude, Judge Sullivan said, and there was actually applause in her voice. Perhaps the Springfield Police Department should consider giving him a commendation. I'll recommend it personally to Chief Harrison, Jake said, reaching down to scratch Rex's ears. The dog's tail wagged harder, though whether he understood the words or was simply responding to the positive energy in the room was impossible to say. Judge Sullivan picked up her gavel. This court orders that Emma Hayes be returned to the custody of her mother, Christine Hayes, subject to all stated conditions, effective immediately. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded less like judgment and more like a starting gun, the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of a case. Christine stood on shaking legs and moved toward Emma. This time, she didn't stop 3 feet away. This time, she closed the distance completely and knelt in front of her daughter, her arms open but not demanding. Can Mommy have a hug? Christine whispered. Emma looked at Rex, as if asking permission or perhaps gathering courage from his calm presence. Then she stepped forward into her mother's arms. The embrace that followed was 6 months overdue. Christine wrapped her arms around Emma's small body and held on like she would never let go, crying into her daughter's hair, murmuring words of love and apology and promise. Emma didn't cry. She seemed to have no tears left, but she held on tight, her small arms circling her mother's neck. Rex sat perfectly still, watching over them both, his presence a silent promise that he would be there every step of the journey ahead. Patricia Thompson approached Judge Sullivan's bench, her own face wet with tears. Your Honor, I just want to say, what you did today was extraordinary. Judge Sullivan smiled tiredly. What happened today was a team effort, Mrs. Thompson, and it wouldn't have been possible without your care for Emma these past months. The Thompsons have been her anchor in a storm. We love that little girl, Patricia said simply. If Christine ever needs help day or night, she just has to call. I'm counting on that, Judge Sullivan said. The village that raises a child needs good people like you in it. As the courtroom slowly emptied, as lawyers packed their briefcases and observers filed out discussing what they'd witnessed, one image remained. A mother and daughter embracing, a German shepherd standing guard, and a police officer who'd made a promise that would change 3 lives forever. Officer Morrison looked at his watch. 10:47. The hearing had lasted just over an hour, but it felt like a lifetime had passed. Come on, Rex, he said softly. We've got a lot of Sundays ahead of us. Rex's tail wagged, and somehow Jake knew the dog understood perfectly. The Springfield County Courthouse steps had never felt so monumental. Christine Hayes stood at the top, holding Emma's hand for the first time in 6 months without a social worker supervising, without a timer running, without the knowledge that in 15 minutes her daughter would be taken away again. This time, Emma was coming home. Really home. Officer Jake Morrison stood beside them, Rex sitting calmly at his feet. The October afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse plaza, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. It was 11:15 a.m., and the world had fundamentally changed. Ms. Hayes, Jake said gently, we should exchange contact information. I'd like to schedule our first visit for this Sunday if that works for you. Christine fumbled with her phone, her hand still trembling. Yes, absolutely. Sunday is perfect. Anytime you want. Morning, afternoon, evening, whatever works for you and Rex. Jake smiled, inputting his number into Christine's phone. How about 2 o'clock? That'll give you ladies a few days to settle in, get reacquainted with each other. Emma tugged on Jake's uniform pants. When he looked down, she was staring up at him with those serious brown eyes that seemed far too old for a 3-year-old. Will Rex remember me? She asked, her voice still small and uncertain, as if she expected her words to disappear into the air like smoke. Jake knelt down, bringing himself to Emma's level, something he'd done so often in the past 2 hours that it was becoming natural. Emma, I promise you, Rex will remember you. Dogs have incredible memories, especially for people they care about, and Rex cares about you very much. As if to prove the point, Rex leaned forward and gently licked Emma's hand. Emma's face lit up, not quite a full smile, but the closest thing to one that Christine had seen in half a year. Christine felt her heart crack open just a little more, hope seeping into the fissures that trauma had carved. Patricia Thompson approached, carrying Emma's small backpack, the one containing the few possessions that had traveled with Emma through foster care. I packed all her things, Patricia said, her voice thick with emotion. Her clothes, her toothbrush, Mr. Hoppy. She pulled out a worn, stuffed rabbit with one ear shorter than the other. Mr. Hoppy. Emma reached for the rabbit, clutching it to her chest. It was another small piece of her old life returning. Christine took the backpack, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for Emma. You've taken such good care of her. Patricia embraced Christine tightly. You take care of her now, honey, and you take care of yourself. You have my number. You call me anytime, 3 in the morning, doesn't matter. If you need a babysitter, a meal, someone to talk to, you call. I will, Christine promised. Thank you for everything. Emma hugged Patricia's legs, still clutching Mr. Hoppy in one arm. Bye, Mrs. Thompson. Patricia bent down, her own tears flowing freely. Bye, sweetheart. You be good for your mommy, okay? And I'll see you again soon. Maybe we can have a play date. Emma nodded, then returned to her mother's side, slipping her small hand back into Christine's. The drive to Christine's apartment was quiet. Emma sat in her car seat, freshly installed that morning in anticipation of this moment, hugging Mr. Hoppy and watching the familiar streets of Springfield pass by the window. Christine kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hardly able to believe this was real, that Emma was really in her car, really coming home. "We have a new apartment, baby," Christine said softly. "It's smaller than our old place, but it's nice. Safe. You have your own room. I painted it yellow. Remember how you always liked yellow." "Like sunshine," Emma said quietly. Christine nearly swerved off the road. Emma was talking, actually talking, using words without being prompted, without fear strangling her voice. "Yes, baby, exactly like sunshine." The apartment was in a modest complex on the east side of Springfield, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen and living room. But it was clean, safe, and most importantly, Derek Marshall had never set foot in it. There were no bad memories embedded in these walls. When they entered, Emma stood in the doorway, taking it all in with cautious eyes. Christine had spent weeks preparing, buying a toddler bed with princess sheets, filling a toy box with age-appropriate toys, hanging cheerful pictures on the walls. But she'd worried it wouldn't be enough, that Emma would see it as a stranger's home rather than her own. "Do you want to see your room?" Christine asked. Emma nodded, still gripping Mr. Hoppy. They walked down the short hallway, and Christine opened the door to reveal the yellow room she'd poured her heart into. Emma stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the space. The bed, the toys, the small bookshelf filled with picture books, the window with its view of a playground below. She walked to the bed and sat down, testing it. Then she looked up at Christine with an expression that held both wonder and uncertainty. "This is mine." "All yours, baby. This is your room in your home." Emma was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Can Rex visit my room?" Christine laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. "When Officer Morrison and Rex come on Sunday, Rex can absolutely visit your room." "Okay." Emma lay back on the bed, still holding Mr. Hoppy, and stared at the ceiling. "Mommy." "Yes, baby." "I missed you." Christine crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered Emma into her arms, sobbing openly. "I missed you too, sweetheart. Every single day, every single moment. Mommy missed you so much." They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter together again, beginning the long journey of healing that neither could walk alone. That first Sunday at exactly 2 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Emma, who'd been coloring at the kitchen table, leaped up so fast she knocked over her cup of crayons. "It's Rex." Christine opened the door to find Officer Morrison in civilian clothes, jeans and a Springfield PD polo shirt, with Rex sitting alertly beside him. "Good afternoon, Ms. Hayes." "Emma." "Please call me Christine. Come in, both of you." Rex entered calmly, but his tail was wagging at double speed when he saw Emma. The little girl dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, burying her face in his fur. "I knew you'd remember me," she whispered. Over the next 6 months, those Sunday visits became sacred. Jake Morrison, who insisted they call him Jake, would arrive at 2 o'clock sharp, sometimes in uniform if he was coming from a shift, usually in casual clothes. He'd stay for an hour, sometimes 2, sitting at Christine's small kitchen table drinking coffee while Emma played with Rex. They'd talk about everything and nothing: Emma's progress in therapy, Christine's job at the grocery store, Jake's own family. He had 2 kids, ages 8 and 10, who were dying to meet Emma and Rex. More importantly, Jake would watch. He'd observe how Christine interacted with Emma, how the apartment was maintained, whether there were signs of stress or struggle. Not as an inspector, but as someone who genuinely cared. Dr. Chen's therapy sessions revealed what they'd all suspected. Emma's trauma was specifically tied to Derek's violence, not to her mother. Each session helped Emma process what she'd witnessed, gave her tools to manage her anxiety, and slowly rebuilt her sense of safety in the world. The nightmares decreased from nightly to weekly to occasional. Emma's vocabulary expanded daily. The dam had broken, and words flowed more freely with each passing week. She started preschool in November, and her teacher reported that while Emma was initially shy, she participated in class and was making friends. But it was the Sundays with Rex that seemed to work the deepest magic. On those afternoons, Emma would show Rex her drawings, read him stories, or attempt to with her developing reading skills, and tell him about her week. Rex would listen with that patient, understanding presence that only dogs possess, his brown eyes tracking Emma's every movement, his tail offering encouragement. "You know," Christine said to Jake one Sunday in late March, 6 months after the hearing, "I think Rex might be Emma's best friend." Jake smiled, watching Emma teach Rex to shake hands for the 100th time, the dog patiently lifting his paw every single time she asked. "I think you might be right, and between you and me, Emma's pretty high on Rex's list too." It was that same afternoon when Emma brought out a piece of paper she'd been working on all week. "I made this for Judge Sullivan," she announced proudly. "Can you give it to her?" Jake took the drawing and his throat tightened. It showed 3 stick figures clearly labeled Mommy, Me, and Rex, standing in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. At the bottom, in careful preschool handwriting with several letters backward, Emma had written, "Thank you for giving me my mommy back." "I'll make sure she gets this," Jake promised. "Tell her I said Rex is a hero," Emma added seriously, "because he is." "I'll tell her," Jake said. "And you know what, Emma? I think you're a hero too." Judge Margaret Sullivan's chambers were lined with photographs, 23 years of cases, families reunited, children who'd written thank you letters, lawyers who'd become friends. But on the wall directly across from her desk, in a simple black frame, hung a child's drawing that had arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. 3 stick figures, a woman, a small girl, and a German shepherd with a carefully drawn police badge. The sun was yellow and enormous, taking up a quarter of the page. The house was crooked, the people were disproportionate, and several letters in the caption were written backward. It was, quite possibly, the most beautiful thing Margaret Sullivan had ever received. "Thank you for giving me my mommy back," it read in wobbly letters. "Rex is my hero, Judge Sullivan is nice, I love my mommy, the bad man is gone forever." Every morning when Margaret arrived at her chambers, she looked at that drawing first. On difficult days, and there were many in family court, it reminded her why she did this work. Not every case ended like Emma Hayes's case. Not every child found their voice. Not every broken family got put back together. But some did, and that had to be enough. The letter that had accompanied the drawing sat in her desk drawer. She pulled it out now, 6 months after the hearing, and read it again for perhaps the 50th time. "Your Honor, I don't have fancy words or legal knowledge, but I needed to write to you. Emma is thriving. She talks nonstop now. Sometimes I actually miss the quiet." Margaret smiled at Christine's little joke. "She's in preschool at Lincoln Elementary, and her teacher says she's smart as a whip and kind to everyone. She's making friends. She laughs again, Your Honor. She actually laughs. The nightmares are mostly gone. We still have hard nights sometimes, especially when it storms or when something unexpected happens, but Dr. Chen has given us tools to work through them. Emma knows she's safe now. She believes it." Officer Morrison and Rex come every Sunday without fail. Emma counts the days between visits. She's decided she wants to be a police officer when she grows up, with a dog just like Rex. Jake, Officer Morrison, has been so wonderful with her, with both of us. He brought his own kids to meet us last month, and now Emma has friends who come over to play. We're building a real life, Your Honor. A good life. I got a promotion at work, assistant manager at the grocery store. I'm taking online business courses at night after Emma goes to bed. I want to show her that people can change, that mistakes don't define you, that hard work and second chances matter. I will never forget what you did for us. You didn't just follow the law, you saw us as people. You gave my daughter a voice by trusting in an unlikely friendship between a little girl and a big dog. You gave me another chance to be the mother Emma deserves. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but it's all I have. Thank you, thank you, thank you. With deep gratitude, Christine Hayes. Margaret folded the letter carefully and returned it to the drawer. A knock on her door interrupted her reflection. "Come in." Officer Jake Morrison entered, Rex at his side as always. Margaret smiled. She'd asked them to stop by today. "Officer Morrison, Rex, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Jake sat and Rex settled at his feet, perfectly behaved as always. "Your Honor, what can we do for you?" Jake asked. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "I wanted to give you an update and to thank you personally. The Hayes case was reviewed last week, standard 6-month check-in. Christine's compliance has been perfect. Emma's therapy reports are excellent. The CPS home visits have found a stable, nurturing environment, and Emma herself has made remarkable progress." Jake's face broke into a genuine smile. "That's wonderful news. Not surprising, but wonderful." "I'm closing the case," Margaret continued. "As of today, Christine Hayes has full, unrestricted custody with no further court oversight. The success of this reunification is due in no small part to you and Rex." "Rex did the hard work," Jake said modestly, reaching down to scratch the dog's ears. "I just held the leash." "Nevertheless, the Springfield Police Department should know what an asset they have in both of you. I've written a formal commendation letter to Chief Harrison, detailing your extraordinary service to this family." Jake looked genuinely moved. "Thank you, Your Honor, that means a lot." "Will you continue the Sunday visits?" Margaret asked. Jake didn't hesitate. "As long as Emma and Christine want us there, we'll be there. It's not court-ordered anymore, but it's become important to us, to me and Rex both." Margaret nodded, understanding. "You've become part of their family." "I guess we have," Jake admitted. "My kids adore Emma. My wife has had Christine over for dinner 3 times. Rex," he looked down at the dog, "Rex has become Emma's unofficial therapy dog, protector, and best friend all rolled into one." "How is Emma really doing?" Margaret asked. "Beyond the reports." Jake's expression softened. "She's a completely different child from the silent, terrified little girl we met in that hallway 6 months ago. She talks constantly, tells stories, asks questions, sings songs. She's curious about everything. Last Sunday, she read Rex an entire book by herself. Granted, it was a simple book, but 6 months ago she couldn't speak at all." He paused, then continued. "She still has moments. Sometimes she'll ask if the bad man is really gone, if he can come back. But those moments are getting fewer. She trusts that the adults in her life will keep her safe now. That's huge progress." "And Christine?" "Christine is doing everything right. She's working hard, taking classes, being present for Emma. She's built a support network. Mrs. Thompson still visits weekly. There's a single mom from Emma's preschool they've become friends with, and our family has sort of adopted them. She's not alone anymore, and that makes all the difference." Margaret felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the one that came when justice and compassion aligned perfectly. "This is why we do this work, Officer Morrison, for moments like these." "Yes, ma'am," Jake agreed. A thought occurred to Margaret. "Have you considered making the therapy dog program permanent, expanding it?" Jake's eyes lit up. "Actually, I've been working on a proposal for Chief Harrison. After seeing what Rex did with Emma, I think every courthouse in the state should have K-9 therapy teams available for children in traumatic situations. I've been researching programs in other states, talking to trainers about identifying dogs with Rex's temperament. If you need a letter of support from the judiciary, you have it," Margaret said firmly. "What happened in my courtroom 6 months ago should be available to every traumatized child who walks through these doors." "I'll take you up on that," Jake said. "Thank you, Your Honor." They talked for a few more minutes, then Jake and Rex prepared to leave. At the door, Jake paused. "Your Honor, can I tell you something Emma said last Sunday?" "Of course." She said, Judge Sullivan is the nicest judge in the whole world because she let Rex come to court with me. Then she asked if all judges are that nice. Jake smiled. I told her that Judge Sullivan was special, but that lots of judges care about kids just like she does. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes for the second time that day. Thank you for telling me that. After Jake and Rex left, Margaret stood at her window, looking out over Springfield. Somewhere in this city, a little girl who'd lost her voice was probably at preschool, raising her hand to answer questions, playing with friends, being the child she was always meant to be. Somewhere, a mother who'd fought her way back from rock bottom was working hard to build a better life. And every Sunday, a police officer and his gentle giant of a dog would show up to remind them both that they weren't alone. Margaret returned to her desk and looked again at Emma's drawing. The crooked house, the smiling stick figures, the oversized sun, and Rex with his badge, a child's vision of a world made right again. She thought about all the cases she'd presided over, all the difficult decisions, all the times she'd lain awake wondering if she'd made the right call. Emma Hayes's case would always stand out, not because it was the most complex or the most dramatic, but because it reminded her of a fundamental truth. Sometimes the best therapy, the most effective intervention, and the clearest path to healing doesn't come from a manual or a protocol. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. From a dog who failed police academy twice because he was too gentle. From an officer willing to go above and beyond his duty. From a judge willing to bend protocol. From a foster mother who loved unconditionally. From a mother who fought for a second chance. And from a 3-year-old who found the courage to whisper her truth to someone who couldn't judge her, couldn't hurt her, couldn't do anything but listen with a loyal heart. Margaret picked up her pen and began drafting her next order. There was another family waiting, another difficult decision to make, another child who needed someone to fight for them. But tonight, before she went home, she'd stop by the store and buy a card. She'd write a note to Emma, telling her how proud she was, how brave she thought Emma was, and how that drawing would stay on her wall forever, a reminder that miracles still happened, even in family court. And maybe, just maybe, she'd include a P.S., "Give Rex a hug for me." Because some heroes wear black robes, some wear police uniforms, and some wear fur and carry their heroism in their gentle hearts. The end.